Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Australian-born, Paris-based jazz pianist and composer Daniel Gassin. We caught up with him to talk about a lot of things like COVID, his life and music, his influences, and his debut 2021 CD, Change of Heart. He is originally from Melbourne, Australia, and is of Franco-American descent with a defined international dimension to his career. It's a great one. Enjoy. Hey, thanks for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, where exactly are you located in the world right now?
Paris, France.
Okay. How's everything going in Paris?
I'd probably rather be back home in my native Melbourne, to be quite honest. But, look, I survived the winter, so that's the main thing.
Yeah.
And now it's a beautiful city again, so it's not so bad. But, obviously the COVID situation is pretty grim. Yeah, other than that, other than the fact that the COVID situation is grim and that there's no gigs, other than that, can't complain.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess the one thing about this whole COVID situation is, no one knew that this was going to manifest the way it did, and it has, and, people couldn't back up any live gigs, but now, because this has been so long, the only real way to communicate is through an album. So talk to me about Change of Heart and the timing and how you feel about this.
That's right. I would say that's the one good thing that kind of maybe, stopped me from feeling like a retired musician or something, was actually having all this album to work towards for all that, which was kind of, in that sense, it was good timing. So as much as the first confinement kind of ruined what was supposed to be a really great year of touring, and within a couple of days of going to play at Dizzy's and coming to New York and all that, but as much as that was a real downer, the recent ones, it's been really nice to have actually plenty of time to work on this album. Yeah, it is a bit of a challenging thing. You can argue it both ways. It can't you in terms of releasing an album now. Obviously, you can't back it up live straight away, but on the other hand, maybe there's more space in terms of, more availability of people who want to distract themselves, including by, when they've watched all the Netflix, maybe they want to listen to some music as well.
So talk to me about growing up in Australia. Like, how did jazz become your life?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. Growing up in Australia, it's a very nice part of the world, and it's a very nice and, yeah, I think nice is the best way to describe it, but it's a really nice part of the world and a very nice place to grow up as a kid. For me, like the jazz thing, it's funny. I think it was kind of like somehow pretty innate for me. Like I always grew up playing piano from a young age. And of course, it started with like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star like everybody else. And then classical. And then, I don't know, I kind of always, even from a young age, from like the age of, my first piano lessons, which were like at age 3.5 or 4 or something like that. Like, I don't know, my teacher, who was a classical teacher, kind of said that I had this tendency to want to play the notes in a different rhythm, maybe even swung or even like wanted to improvise beyond, what I was supposed to be playing. And of course, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just kind of doing my thing. And then there was one time, I think when I was about maybe 10 or 11, something like that, and I was sitting waiting for my piano lesson and waiting for the student before me to finish, and the student was playing not what I'd call jazz, but like some kind of notated jazz concepts, and I kind of heard that, and I said, oh, that's what I want to play, actually. And so at that point, my teacher said, okay, if you want to go in that direction, I should put you onto a jazz teacher, and so he did, and so I went to jazz lessons from the age of about 11 to 16, I would say. Yeah, until I got into my first band.
So who were some of your early influences that really inspired you?
Probably, depends on, define early. I guess early, before I had no idea what jazz really was and all of that. My parents had a very good and eclectic record collection, and included in there was, a couple of Monk records, Keith Jarrett Colm concert, so quite varied, and also Ray Charles. So 3 very different, those were the main kind of jazz related things that I heard played when I was a kid. My parents were not musicians, but they had a nice record collection, quality, not quantity. But and that's, from a young age. And then, maybe coming through when I started to actually have some inkling of what jazz was, I guess maybe the first guy that I was mostly drawn to is Herbie Hancock. And then, of course, also at a young age, actually, I forgot to mention, at a young age, I was lucky enough, would have been 1994, something like that, when McCoy Tyner came to Melbourne. I did a workshop and, I got there very early and got to the front row of this not very big room and got to look over McCoy's shoulder while, he talked about his life, and then he also did some playing with his trio, which was pretty amazing. Obviously, when you're kind of impressionable 13-year-old Aussie, to have like McCoy Tyner like in the middle of suburban northeast Melbourne playing in front of you, and then hearing his concert as well at the Arts Centre in Melbourne. So that was definitely, that was when I got to see the real thing, actually at a very young age when you think about it. That was inspiring, obviously.
Yeah, that was another part that I was going to lead into, was early performances that you witnessed.
That's the standout, I can tell you.
Yeah.
In 1994.
What was the scene like in Australia? How did you get to a point where you're in Paris now, and how do you contrast both of the areas, between Paris and Melbourne? What's the big difference? Did you have culture shock?
I didn't have too much culture shock because as you can maybe guess from my surname, I have a French side and a French father. So I came here speaking fluent French and all of that. So it certainly wasn't a big culture shock for me. For family reasons, I've been coming to France every, 2-3 years since I was, since before I could walk, obviously without really knowing it, but just seeing family and all that. And of course, being able to, disembark from the airplane speaking fluent French really helps. So, and, I'd been here on exchange as well in Paris. So, certainly wasn't, it definitely is still a culture shock, but obviously much, much less than for most people arriving. And yeah, in terms of how is you were asking me how the scene was in Australia, you were saying?
Yeah.
There's a lot of really great stuff going on there, and especially, this is not parochial, this is factual, especially in my hometown of Melbourne, we have really a lot of great music being played in Melbourne in a lot of different styles. We do have a really nice jazz scene, I think, which is not, it's nothing compared to the quantity of Paris in terms of the amount of players or the amount of clubs, but in terms of the quality, I think there's a really strong scene in Australia, and particularly in Melbourne, where there's a more favourable live music environment than in other cities. And I think what's great in Melbourne, mostly, I think, is like creatively, Melbourne is very strong, actually. That's really something that I think, we punch above our weight in terms of the originality of the music and the projects that we're able to produce in Melbourne, I think. And certainly we don't have to blush when compared to other scenes in that department. And I think you're coming here in France, it was definitely a bit of a culture shock. It's a different vibe, and it's a different vibe maybe with kind of different, because of like the socio-cultural differences and the historical differences, and the way that jazz is definitely part of French history and culture, but of course not in the same way as it is part of American culture. And I think in Australia we tend to be more turned towards the American culture and the American way of playing and what we prioritize in the music. And I think France has a bit of a different outlook on that, coming from more of a classical tradition, for example. And so, yeah, there were some cultural differences, and certainly it's a scene where there's a lot of technical excellence as well. Like, people can really play the hell out of their instruments here, and, that's only getting stronger and stronger each year, I think, as more and more people gravitate here, including from America. I think it comes from, the music obviously comes from a different historical, cultural place, and so it has its own sound. It is quite different, quite competitive as well. I think there's quite a competitive aspect to things in France. I think that's kind of quite ingrained in the culture in everyday life. I think from having done a bit of schooling in France at a young age, which I found quite stressful actually, because in Australia we were kind of a bit more easygoing. But I think, in France they certainly like to, they like to rank you and from the first to last and give you a score out of 20. And I think that's something that's pretty deeply ingrained in French culture, which, obviously produces a culture of excellence, but it's not always adapted to everything, including music, for example, I would say.
What do you like the best about being a professional musician?
God, there's a lot of things to like about being a professional musician. There really is. I mean, there's a few things to dislike, but there's a lot of things to love about being a professional musician. And I think what I really like the most is being on the road with my friends, and I love that. I really do. I kind of cherish those moments, and to just be on the road, even from being silly in the airplane all the way to doing the gigs to, of course, discovering new countries and cities and cultures. Those are I find those kind of really great, fun and also formative experiences. And I think, I think that's probably the thing that I really enjoy the most. And I think maybe I'm a bit more of a kind of artistic, metaphysical level. I kind of also really enjoy, it's jazz. So, I really enjoy the exchange with the musicians, and I really enjoy, something that I'm like everyone I missed a lot right now. I really enjoy playing for people and playing, feeding off of that energy, and there's an interaction there with the people who you play for. So those are the things I would say that I love the most. And I miss them all quite a lot at the moment, I can tell you.
Well, and speaking of that, when we do return to live music, what do you hope we all realize, both musician and the audience collectively, about the power of live music when we get back?
I hope that we all just don't take for granted its existence. That's what I would say. I guess that's mostly maybe from an audience perspective, but, I don't know, maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but maybe people will realize how much, value there is in their everyday lives of it being able to go out and experience live music. Having not been able to have that for, 13, 14 months and counting, hopefully that will maybe recalibrate some people's view on the value of live music, I think. That's what I really hope. And, of course, I just can't wait to get back into it in terms of the musicians. Hopefully it doesn't, hopefully the fabric of live music is not too damaged, by closures of venues and things like that. And that, it can really continue to thrive and hopefully even, be better than it was before.
Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you're the one that's living your life. Who do you think you are?
Who do I think? Wow, now that is a very broad question, and one that I was not weighing. Who do you think you are? It's funny. In the last kind of couple of years, there's been a number of different people who've used a kind of specific word to describe me, which is kind of something I never would have thought of. And that word was spiritual, and that is not at all in the religious sense of the word. So I was kind of quite surprised when I had a collection of different people from different walks of life kind of use that word to describe me. And so that kind of got me thinking a little bit about myself. And I think that, I like to think that I like to bring quite a lot of that to the music of this album. Actually, I think that that's really, there's quite an undercurrent of that throughout the music on the album. And other than that, I'd say, someone who's, pretty calm, pretty easygoing, easy to get along with, and also someone who's an all-rounder, someone who likes to enjoy, different aspects of life. I just got back from hitting tennis balls, and, I haven't always worked as a full-time musician in my life. So, having different aspects to my personality, which can be challenging for the music career, but can also be enriching.
Right on. Daniel, that's a great answer. Hey, thank you for taking a minute out to talk about the new music and your life in music. Good luck with everything.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Melbourne, Paris, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Daniel for his time, cool, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.